Good morning and welcome to the June 8th, 2021 Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting. All meetings seem so significant these days, but this becomes even more significant in that all commissioners and all county staff and all of our community partners have been working so diligently to move us out of COVID-19 and the restrictions attendant thereto. And we will learn a lot more during the report from Mr. Adams, but it's my huge pleasure to share what most commissioners already know, that Lane County is now at past the 65% threshold of all residents in the county 16 and over having been vaccinated. We are getting close. We are going to be moving into risk level 1. We have even requested the governor's office to perhaps allow that to occur as early as tomorrow. So while I'm not the expert and Mr. Adams is, and we will receive that report, I want to congratulate each and every member of your staff, Mr. Mokrahajski, in public health. I want to congratulate each and every board member for staying focused on solutions as we hopefully begin transitioning to being completely open here soon. Having said that, item number 1 on the agenda, adjustments to the agenda. Are there any adjustments? Did I see your hand, Commissioner Farr?
Negative, Chair Bernie. Although I will mention the HSC meeting that starts at noon today, so we'll try and end prior to that.
And I will mention that I will be leaving for a Lane County press conference at 10 a.m. I'm really disappointed because I think the policy lab is really cool and it's one of the few pleasures we get to hear university students presenting. But since Vice Chair will take the chair, my guess is if he wants to end by noon, we'll end by noon. Number 2, emergency business. Mr. Mokrahajski? None? Seeing none, this is the time at which people from the public are invited to make public testimony. We have organized this so Diana, I don't have my script here, so if I make mistakes, let me know, but you are organized as attendees in the meeting. If you want to speak to provide testimony, raise your hand. Your hand should be an icon on your screen. Only click it once. Our moderator, Diana, will call on you. You will have up to 3 minutes to make public testimony. We don't anticipate there will be so many people that want to make it that we would have to limit time in any way, but if there are, we may have to. And at this time, Diana, do you see any hands for public testimony?
At this time, if you wish to give public testimony, please raise your virtual hand and I will call upon you to present. Andrew Frost, I do see that you are on, but I don't see your hand up. However, we have been communicating via chat, so I will unmute you at this time. And if you would like to begin, if you would like to give public testimony, now is the time. I will set the timer for 3 minutes and you will be able to speak to the board. Mr. Frost, I do show you are self-muted. If you would like to unmute yourself, you can begin testimony. Mr. Frost, I don't know, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I'm seeing yourself muted, so I'll give you a couple of seconds to try to unmute and give testimony. Otherwise, we'll need to move forward. Chair Bernie, I'm not getting any feedback from Mr. Frost, so if you'd like to move forward, I will return the meeting to you.
Oh, there were no other hands raised?
There are not.
Okay, then we are now on item 4, Commissioner response to any comments, which there were none this morning, and or issues and remonstrance. Are there any commissioners that would like to comment at this time? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. Ever so briefly, Mr. Frost, sorry we couldn't hear your voice this morning. I masked my English accent with an American one. You don't. I miss the sound of your voice. I did listen to your message last night on the phone, and I will give you a call later on this day. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. First, I just want to wish everyone out there and on the staff and my community a happy Pride Month. At a time of escalating division and vitriol and threats, I'm hoping everyone can both stay safe, but also find time to celebrate and elevate yourselves and others. And just a heads up to my colleagues and to staff later this afternoon during Commissioner's business and future assignments, I'll have 2 items, one relating to support for medical respite, supervised medical respite beds, and the other regarding an in acknowledgement of Indigenous Peoples Day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Are there any other commissioners? Seeing none, we now are moving to item 5, County Administration. A, COVID response and recovery. And we have, as usual, Mr. Mokaiski and Mr. Adams to walk us through this item.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I'll just turn it over to Mr. Adams and say that we do have some good news. So we're feeling like we're turning a bit of a corner here, and excited to share a little bit of that related to vaccination rates, as well as more information that we'll share later this morning at our press conference at 10:30. I think I just want to start by saying a big thank you to our staff in Lane County, our volunteers in the community, and our partners who have all been a part of, not just the last week, the last few weeks we've talked a lot about like, get to 65, get to 65. Well, we're at 65 as Chair Bernie indicated. Now we need to get 70 and 75 and 80, right? So there's still more work to be done, but this is a momentous opportunity to just pause for a minute and demonstrate our appreciation to all the people who have been working for 4 or 5 months here, round the clock almost, getting our community vaccinated, and then the great leadership and outreach and coordination and partnership that various folks have done in our organization and in our community to make sure that our community is represented and advocated for in all the ways that we need to with the state and other partners. So I just want to, start on that sort of positive note, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Adams to talk about the state of the disease and more about vaccinations in the community.
Come on.
Okay.
Come on.
Good.
Hello, am I interrupting your meeting?
We are now, is this Mr. Frost?
Have I somehow got into this meeting now? Somehow? Finally? Yes, this is Mr. Frost.
What do we do in this instance, Diana? We now have moved.
I have now muted him.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry for the interruption, Mr. Adams.
No, indeed. Chair Bernie, Commissioners, good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you as always. Am hopeful that you're able to see the familiar EpiCurve this morning as we move through our update this morning. So as Chair Bernie noted in his opening remarks, it is an auspicious day, an auspicious briefing. We have at some point on Saturday surpassed the mark for our OHA imposed deadline or a benchmark of 65% of our 16 plus population. This comes as our cases continue to decline. I have been showing you a more zoomed in view of our epi curve over the last few months, last few weeks, but I really wanted to pull back out and look at the pandemic as a whole. So the winter surge, of course, we experienced, and then more recently, the spring surge that we saw. You see that we are cresting downward now nicely in terms of cases, and we have continued to see fewer and fewer individuals reported on a regular basis. And that is showing up in our most recent risk metrics released this morning as well. So this morning, for the latest 2-week period, we're down to 84.7 cases per 100,000. That would keep us within the moderate risk range on a case basis, but you'll note that we've crested downward from 130 just in 94 last week, 132 weeks ago. We continue to have a lower case rate per 100,000 state as a whole. And our hospital capacity continues to be quite strong with 21 individuals in hospital at the moment related to COVID, 6 of whom are in ICU beds. So we feel confident in where we stand at the moment with respect to our caseload, and particularly in light of our ongoing vaccination efforts. So 2 weeks ago, the last time I had the opportunity to brief this board, we noted, and I reported that day, that we were at 202,541 people vaccinated in Lane County. We, at that point, were 1 week into vaccinating our 12 to 15-year-olds. Overall, all providers in Lane County had provided over 360,000 doses of COVID-19 vaccine. So bringing us to date, these are the data available as of yesterday from OHA. 212,147 people vaccinated in Lane County. And so an increase of 10,000 people over the 2-week period of time, and now 384,000 doses cumulatively invested. So we, I think it's appropriate to really call out the incredible partnership that this work has required. Many of you will recall early January, me reporting our first shipment of vaccine arriving at Lane County Public Health. But even 3 or 4 weeks before we received vaccine, Peace Health and McKinsey Willamette were receiving vaccine for frontline workers. So we have been really and truly at this since just prior to the winter holidays when vaccine first arrived in Wayne County. Throughout the course of this effort, we have worked closely with Wayne Community College, with the University of Oregon, with our municipal partners in Florence, Springfield, Eugene Springfield Fire Department, the fire districts across the county, and countless others, as well as our pharmacies and our medical providers, to continue to provide vaccine and make every opportunity available to individuals. We now, as of this day, have vaccinated 210,016 plus individuals, and that was the 65% benchmark that was set for us. So one arrives at that number with just a little bit of convoluted math. One must subtract from this 212 number the over almost 6,000 individuals who are from 12 to 15 years of age from that number to arrive at the 16 plus population, and then to add the 4,050 doses administered by federal agencies in Wayne County. So after that addition and subtraction maneuver, one arrives at the 210 mark, and we met that on Saturday of this past weekend. Efforts continue, of course. As we move forward, we are seeing the conclusion of our mass vaccination activities. We will continue to run our nightly mass vax activities at Autzen Station, at Autzen Stadium, rather, Monday and Friday of this week, and then Monday and Friday of next week, with the final day of operations at that facility on Friday, the 18th of June. This coming weekend, we intend to operate one last weekend for June 12 to 13. That's Saturday the 12th and Sunday the 13th, and we will be providing doses at the weekend for one last time as we go. But as Mr. Mokrahajski noted, we have more work to do. So what does the path look like moving forward? Well, for this graphic that our analysts put together, I think is really an interesting view of how we have managed to deliver doses over a period of time. This doesn't include the most recent week of activity, as we're still catching up on the data from OHA. But the kind of teal color there are doses administered directly by Lane County government and our partners and volunteers. The gray are the pharmacies. So that is everything from Freddy's to the Safeway Albertsons to the smaller independents like McCoy's down in Cottage Grove. Hospitals are in orange, and then the other organizations here in purple. You will note, and you see this very clearly, the ramp up and longevity of mass vax operations. But beginning in late April and early May, we saw demand declining within our mass vax operations. And you saw it really a very steady level of continued activity, most notably in our pharmacy programs. So they our healthcare providers and our pharmacies will continue to be the principal means through which individuals will have access to vaccine moving forward through the summer. As we close down our mass vax activities, and as I've reported to this board in previous testimony, we will be pivoting our resources to providing mobile clinics. Last week, we completed over 30 mobile missions, covering the board from popping up at high schools around the county to community-led clinics to direct outreach. And we will continue to offer vaccination opportunities as creatively and as broadly as we possibly can to ensure that we're continuing to deliver vaccination opportunities right into the sort of gaps, if you will, others who are not able to access healthcare. Chair Bernie, I think that is the conclusion of my prepared remarks for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adams. This is a pivotal moment. Do any commissioners have any questions or comments for Mr. Adams? Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I too want to express my gratitude and thanks to the entire team there at Health and Human Services who've been working so hard and very, very long hours all this time in order to get us to this point. And we weren't sure how quickly we would get there, and you never really know exactly what the rules are going to be from the state to get here. But we've made it, and it's a time for a bit of celebration, cautiously, of course. We're not fully in the clear yet, but we see it in the horizon, and I just can't wait until we can move through this and we can get on to some normal schedules again, or what was normal. That's all up in the air at the moment too, right? So what do we feel like is normal nowadays? Things have changed in permanent ways for most people over the course of this last year and a half. I still haven't necessarily figured out what childcare means for me anymore. And for a lot of parents out there, they're still working through what it means to get childcare and get back up to work. I just, I'm feel a little bit celebratory, but also know that we want to be cautious and move through exiting this phase properly, knowing that we've got good things in our horizon. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, thank you very much, Commissioner. Are there any other commissioners? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. And Steve Adams, thanks for your tireless work. I've seen you in the field and on the screen, and it seems to me you likely never sleep. So now maybe you'll get an opportunity to put your head on the pillow a little bit. And when I say that to you, I mean that to everybody who you know have been working around you. It's been pretty intense work, which we all have witnessed, sometimes from a distance, sometimes a little bit closer. And a reminder, as we do enter what is somewhat of a celebratory phase, where we can appreciate the work that has been done, a lot of other work is now just beginning as we recover, and not the least of which is the unprecedented number of unsheltered people that we have in Lane County, and the unprecedented number of people who are in imminent danger of becoming homeless in Lane County. Staff is working hard on that, and as we go through the next weeks and months, we'll be receiving reports as to how Lane County is putting its best foot, in fact, its greatest effort forward to make sure that we're addressing the newly unsheltered people, the newly unhoused people, and the potentially unhoused people. Steve Adams, thanks. That does not diminish the work that has been done by any stretch of the imagination. It just enhances our capability of addressing the pressing needs that will come from this moment forward. Steve, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. I echo both commissioners that spoke before me. Everything that was said, I appreciate. I think, Mr. Adams, you know, I appreciate you and your work and that of your team. I want to give a special shout out of appreciation to the community volunteers, for those of Lane County's team. This is what folks went into this line of work to do and respond to. These are the moments that we both dread and live for when we're in public service, but for community volunteers for whom it was completely optional, whether they spent an hour or a day or every weekend at our clinics helping out. I want to give an extra shout out, and I'm looking forward to getting to a point where we get the sort of wrap up report from you and get to hear what we've been able to leverage in terms of community involvement and investment in this effort. I also, without trying to take away from the celebratory nature, also look forward to hearing what our plans are for the anticipated fall and or winter surge in new cases, and what we can be doing in the months ahead to prepare community for that and minimize that inevitable situation. And then finally, I just have one clarifying question on your bar graph that showed the number of doses. The other organizations, that purple section, is that the community organizations that we were still working in partnership? So in other words, Lane County Public Health was still involved, they just weren't exclusively our events? Or can you just share with me what's included in that section?
Chair Bernie, Commissioner Trieger, it's a fantastic question. So indeed, the other organizations is something of a grab bag. So that is everything from Wayne County residents who are incarcerated in state facilities and receive vaccinations, and those come back and count against our totals, to individuals receiving other services as well. And it's also all of our primary care providers in town. So everyone from Oregon Medical Group to Springfield Family Physicians. And for those individuals, many of those shots were indeed doses that we allocated to them during, many months of relative scarcity.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we get the full picture and we give the community the full picture of the hand that Lane County Public Health. I think if nothing else, the silver lining to all this is many people who had no idea that there was such a thing as a public health entity. This has really elevated the profile of public health departments, and hopefully then helps other folks understand all the many other areas that public health works in. But I just want to make sure we have the full picture of the impact and the imprint of public health's work in this Herculean effort. Thank you.
Well stated, Commissioner. Are there any other commissioners that would like to make? Yes, Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. And I too just want to echo everybody's thanks to the public health staff for the great work that you guys have done throughout the pandemic, from the early contact tracing and scrambling to get testing resources to the latter efforts on vaccinations and getting the vaccines out to the public. But for the public, I just want to note a word of caution. As we hit the magical arbitrary 65% first dose for our adult population, that doesn't mean we won. And I want to point to Deschutes County for just an example of that. They hit 65% several weeks ago and got dropped into low risk. Yet their hospitalization rate is far higher than ours. They have zero capacity left in adult ICU beds in Region 3, which is their region, or Region 7, sorry. Region 3 is us. Region 7. And they're at 172.6 cases per 100,000, while Lane is sitting at 84.7. So we need to still take this disease seriously. And people need to continue to get the vaccine and be cautious, because even with hitting 65%, you can still be running numbers that should have that county in the high, if not almost extreme risk, because of their hospital capacity and their rate per 100,000, and also their test positivity at 6.6%. I mean, as you look at Deschutes County, that definitely shows that, we have this issue. 65% is not a magic number, except for the arbitrary lowering of our risk level and the restrictions on businesses that probably shouldn't have had those restrictions on in the first place, but that's a completely different conversation. But just please, folks, understand 65% doesn't mean we're done. And Deschutes County is a lesson for all of us to watch.
Thank you, Commissioner. Steve, did you want to respond to any of the statements that you just heard from either Commissioner Bozievich or Commissioner Krieger?
Chair Bernie, I very much appreciate the commissioner's notes of caution. Truly, no good deed goes unpunished. I would like to say that first and foremost. 65% is a wonderful benchmark that we've managed to achieve, but we very much have to continue our efforts to get additional vaccinations done. Truly, I think we are hopeful of hitting somewhere in the high 70% range for our total population, really to put us into a position going into the fall where we would see, and we know we will have cases this fall. That's just the nature of this particular virus. But with a higher vaccination rate, we will see our case curve for the coming fall winter be a fraction of what it was this past year that we just experienced, and one that would be manageable with a much smaller response, and one that would not be nearly as disruptive to our economy moving forward. With regard to really, I think Deschutes County is a bit of a cautionary tale, and we recognized very much so that once we achieved 65%, we had the opportunity not to request to move into lower risk. But really looking at our case data, looking at our test positivity rates, really and truly, we were pleased to make the recommendation from the staff level that we move forward into requesting this movement into lower risk. We feel that from a public health perspective, we're on sound footing as we move forward. But all of the notes of caution and diligence have to be underscored and understood. Our future case rates really is a function of our current behavior.
Thank you. You know what my dad always told me was hope for the best and plan for the worst. And it usually lands somewhere in between. Given that, I'm curious if Commissioner Trieger mentioned an inevitable surge in the fall. Is that inevitable, and what do you anticipate as it relates to that?
Chair Bernie, we are looking specifically at scenarios in which we continue to see a much slower rate of vaccine uptake throughout the summer going into the fall. There's some unknowns. We're not sure when FDA will approve vaccines for individuals younger than 12 years of age. That will have some impacts in what ultimately is there. And in considering folk who are not vaccinated but were exposed and carry forward some degree of natural immunity, really trying to get a sense of what the fall might hold for us. But assuming that we manage to get into the mid 70% range, we're planning for a fall wave of about 25% of what we saw this past year.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And then, and forgive me, Ben, Commissioner Bozovich mentioned Deschutes County as a cautionary tale. I think you reiterated that. How do we mitigate against that, or do we, in Lane County?
Chair Bernie, that's a terrific question. So I think the state of disease was just community spread was different there than it has been here. I think that would require a fuller analysis of disease dynamics over the past months to see the rate of change there. We have greater hospital capacity here as well. So I think that really, if I were in my counterpart's role in Deschutes County, I would be quite nervous about the hospital capacity that they're looking at over there. I think it was quite telling that St. Joseph's took it upon themselves prior to Memorial Day holiday to do public information and communications out to the broader public, urging caution over the weekend because of the concern that they had about hospital capacity. Our hospital capacity remains very strong. Our demographics are a bit different here than they are in Deschutes County, and I think that bodes well for us for the coming few months.
Thank you. And I concur with all the commissioners and sort of the words of both congratulations and caution. Concur with your and others' words about the fact that this was in heroic work by county staff and your staff, Steve. Heroic work by businesses, and community volunteers, and what have you. This body has constantly advocated for the unique needs of different sectors in our economy, from education through business. We're with you every step of the way, and we all know in our respective worlds. In my past world, I can tell you that reaching certain levels of energy efficiency in buildings, it was the last little bits of efficiency that were always the most expensive and the most difficult to attain. And I presume that's where we are now. We have achieved what some may have considered an arbitrary goal. I've considered it an arbitrary goal, but arbitrary goals are important. It's relatively arbitrary if we drive on the right or left-hand side of the road, but it's a good thing that arbitrary, policy is in place. So while we've made a huge achievement, and we should be appreciative and thankful, I think we should also look at how this body has used a bad situation and has positioned us to do more for the unsheltered, because it was not county money that enabled us to purchase the facility to house COVID patients. But we now own that asset. And moving forward, we have multiple assets that included that this crisis enabled us to control, so that we have more assets to support shelter moving forward. There's so much to be thankful of, and there's so much to stay vigilant about. And I can't thank you, your staff, or my fellow commissioners enough for staying on it, staying focused this whole time. Thank you so much, Mr. Adams. And is there any other comments by commissioners on this subject? Mr. Adams, are there any parting words you would like to leave us with?
Chair Bernie, I am grateful to you. I'm grateful to this board for your constant support and your focus and your assistance in getting the word out and in helping us in partnership educate the community. I'm grateful to Steve Mokrahysky and Karen Gaffney, who have been so tremendous in ensuring that I had every resource I need. And of course, huge gratitude to the 700 volunteers who helped us get shots in arms over the last several months, and to the staff who have truly worked their hearts out.
Thank you, everyone. I wish we could say we've reached our goal. We're just getting closer, and we will continue to have these reports. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you, Chair.
Before we move to consent calendar, I know that Mr. Frost was trying to speak to us. Diana, if he's still waiting with the commissioner's indulgence, could we allow him an opportunity to address this body? Would that be okay, commissioners?
Chair Bernie,
Yes.
he is no longer on the line.
Okay, thank you. In that case, we move to item 6, consent calendar. Does the chair have a motion?
Chair Bernie,
Yes, sir.
I move the consent calendar for June 8th, 2021.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Vice Chair Farr has moved and Commissioner Buck has seconded approval of the July 8th, 2021 consent calendar. Is there discussion to the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Let the record show that the consent calendar for June 8th, 2021, motion made by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Buck for approval, was unanimously approved 5-0. We now move to item 7, is that right? Yep, we now move to item 7 on our agenda, 7A, Order 21-06-08-06, in the matter of approving 14 contracts and 15 amendments and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the approved actions. Karen Gaffney is here to walk us through this item.
Morning, Chair Bernie and commissioners, and I just want to add my echoes of appreciation from the last item on the COVID response. I deeply appreciate Steve Adams' leadership and the leadership of the board and the county administrator in getting us to the point we are. So thank you all very much for being part of the team. This particular item in front of you today is in anticipation of our new fiscal year. So many of these contracts are ones that we annually renew. There are a lot of them, as the chair mentioned in reading the item title. So I'm not going to go through each of them. I do want to lift up a few in particular and remind the viewing public that the complete list and packet is available on the website if people want to look through each of those. Today we have a mixture of revenue agreements and expense agreements, some new contracts, and
Karen, for some reason you just got muted.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. I'm sure it was operator error on my side. So thank you. So I don't know exactly where in my spiel that happened, but I want to review just a few of the items that are on the list, and then I'm happy to answer questions the board may have about any of them. In the category of revenue agreements, we have our master grant agreement with the Oregon Housing and Community Services, as well as our our biennial agreement with the Department of Human Services for financing of our DD services. So those are large dollar amount items, and for the public's information, when we come to you, we're asking for delegated authority for the county administrator to sign these. So we're estimating what we think those amounts will be, and the legislature is clearly still doing their work, so we don't have final numbers, but we have asked for enough delegated authority for the county administrator to sign those when those come through. Additionally, I would lift up, we have 2 revenue agreements on here for our workforce programs. This was the time in our 5-year cycle where we needed to competitively apply for our workforce funding through the Workforce Investment Act and Lane Workforce Partnership. And I'm very proud of our staff in the Human Services Division who prepared that grant application, and we were selected as the contractor moving forward. So that contract will run through the end of June 2025 and is $8 million of the contracts that are on your list for today. I think it's also important on the expense category that this is a renewal of many of our contracts in the human services area. And I know Commissioner Farr mentioned earlier the important work that's happening in housing and homelessness. So we have contracts on this list, for instance, with Carry It Forward and Shelter Care, Homes for Good, Community Supported Shelters, Square One Villages, ensuring that we're able to continue to provide financial support through those nonprofits and the services that they provide to the community. So those are renewals of contracts and extending them into either the end of next fiscal year or beyond, depending on the contract. So I think maybe I'll stop there with my overview, since I know there's a limited time for this item, but again, I'm happy to answer any questions.
No, it's a significant item, Ms. Gaffney, so thank you for even preliminarily walking us through. And I know that Commissioner Farr would like to speak now.
Thank you, Chair Burney. Ever so briefly, you look through this list of contracts, Ms. Gaffney, and it's like a who's who in the providers in Lane County. And the providers in Lane County are actually wished for by the network of providers that we have by the other counties. We have a remarkable network of providers. A quick question, if I may, and that is the Poverty and Homelessness Board serves as our continuum of care agency, recommending the distribution of HUD funds annually. Do any of these contracts reflect any of the continuum of care money that has come through the county?
Chair Burney and Vice Chair Farr, that's an excellent question. I do not believe this list includes the continuum of care dollars. I believe that was on a separate board item. As you know, we work very hard to leverage resources and really braid together a variety of different funding sources. So I believe what's on this list here is mostly community development block grant revenue and other state revenue.
Thank you, Ms. Gaffney. I did not prompt you by letting you know that I was going to ask that question. I think that was the answer that I anticipated, in understanding that you, and I'm looking at you personally, leverage so many outside dollars to come into Lane County to provide the direct service through our network of providers. Thank you, and to everyone involved in doing that, Karen. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Other commissioners? Seeing none, I would just like to make a point that's not directly related, and that is we also need to remember that all dollars that Ms. Gaffney, that behavioral health attracts to our community for needed services is also a form of economic development. It is also, in fact, creating jobs here, giving people with incomes the ability to spend their dollars here locally. And I don't want to discount that aspect of what you do, even though I know that's probably furthest from your mind. Those impacts do occur as you continue on attracting dollars to deliver services to the most vulnerable in our community. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion on this before we hear a motion? I believe we're ready for a motion. Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Chair Burney. I move order 210608-06 in the matter of approving 14 contracts and 15 amendments and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the approved actions.
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Trieger. It has now order 21-06-08-06 has now been moved by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Trieger. Is there further discussion to the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Let the record show that order 21-06-08-06, moved by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Trieger, has been unanimously approved 5-0. I know we're going to be on a roll with you here, Ms. Gaffney. We've done it before. We are now on 7B, order 21-06-08-07 in the matter of making sole source determinations for selection of 2 HHS Human Services Division projects and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the determinations and contracts with St. Vincent de Paul as a sole source provider. And before we begin this, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to declare a conflict of interest on this item as well as the next item, 7C, Order 21-06-08-08, as I am related to the Executive Director of St. Vincent de Paul. I'll turn my camera off for these 2 items and come back when you're done. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Karen, would you walk us through this item?
Yes, Chair Burney, I'm happy to do that. This particular item, again, is part of our annual process of renewing contracts and making sure services are in place moving forward. It would typically be considered a routine item, but because it does involve St. Vincent de Paul, it's on your regular agenda for today. The specific 2 contracts, service areas that are in this packet are for rapid rehousing services for families and motel emergency shelter services. And we're asking for authority to declare St. Vincent de Paul a sole source. We did advertise for providers and did not receive responses. And so we have approached St. Vincent de Paul to request that they provide those services for us moving forward. I'm happy to answer any questions if the board has any.
Does the board have any questions or comments for Ms. Gaffney on this item? Vice Chair Farr.
Chair Burney, just to note that this is not a small item. I think the total dollar amount we're talking about in this this one motion, Ms. Gaffney, is in excess of $12 million. And it's just an indication of the amount of energy resource that we do spend in making certain that people are, if they are unhoused, that they're back in housing as soon as possible and preventing people from becoming unhoused. So thank you once again for all the work that is done by your departments.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments? The chair is ready for that. Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Chair Burney. I move order 21-06-08-07 in the matter of making sole source determinations for selection of 2 HHS Human Services Division projects and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the determinations and contracts with St. Vincent de Paul as a sole source provider.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there
I'll second.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Order 21-06-08-07 has been made by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Trieger. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Let the record now show that order 21-06-08-07 was made by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Trieger, has passed unanimously 4-0 with Commissioner Buck excused, or what is the term? Recused? Recused. Thank you very much, Commissioner Rosen. We are now on item 7C, Order 21-06-08-08, in the matter of approving 4 contracts with St. Vincent de Paul and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the contracts. Ms. Gaffney?
Chair Bernie, these 4 contracts are really in the same spirit as the first item that you approved, but we have separated them from that packet so that Commissioner Buck was able to declare her conflict. These 4 contracts are part of renewing and extending our services into the next several years. These contracts are scheduled to end at the end of June 2024 and are for services in our Human Services Division. So Access Center for Homeless Families, Access Center for Homeless Adults, short-term housing for homeless families, and homeless prevention services for Eugene families are the 4 contracts involved here.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gaffney. Gaffney, are there any questions? Vice Chair Farr.
Not to sound like a broken record, but once again, thanks. This is an indication of how much energy and resource Lane County does direct toward homeless services. In particular, I'd like to point out the second one, which is the Access Center for Homeless Adults, which is a $2.3 million project. Is that is the Richard Lindholm Center on Highway 99 in Bethel? Is that correct, Karen?
Yes, I believe that is true, Commissioner Farr, Chair Bernie.
That is, and we've all been by there. It's directly across from where Camp 99 was, directly across from where Carriot Ford is located, and directly across from St. Vincent de Paul's, the shelter that they operate in Bethel. So once again, Chair Bernie, thank you for indulging me, but Karen, the work that your staff does in making these contracts work is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to briefly point out that I'm especially pleased to see this on the agenda and presume passage of it because of the focus on some of the youth homelessness prevention work. Of course, the best way to prevent homelessness in adulthood is to get our youth stabilized and supported with what they need to succeed. So especially both sort of heartbroken and pleased to see these dollars being allocated to youth homelessness prevention.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, Chair will entertain a motion. Thank you, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. I'd like to move Order 21-0608-08 in the matter of approving 4 contracts with St. Vincent de Paul and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the contracts.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Order 21-06-08-08 has been made by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Trieger. Is there discussion to the motion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? You like to mess me up, don't you, Commissioner? Opposed? Nay. Order for the record, Order 21-06-08-08. The motion made by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Trieger, has been unanimously approved, 4-0. Commissioner Buck recused.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gaffney. Any part up? I was going to ask if there were any parting shots for the board, but you didn't hesitate to leave.
No, just deep appreciation for the board. Thank you, Chair Bernie.
And I'm speaking on behalf of all of us right back at you. Welcome, Commissioner Buck. I would just like to take a moment and thank Diana. I never know what's going to happen with these agendas or how long certain agenda items are going to take, but somehow magically it is 9:55 and it is time for us to, for item 8 on our agenda, County Administration, which has a 10 a.m. time certain item. Mr. Rickoff, if you will allow us We'll start a little early, but because I expect Mr. Adams to come in that door any minute and, with the cane by my neck and yank me out, I would just like to say that I'm extremely disappointed that I'll be missing these Policy Lab presentations. I know how important and fond you are of them, what an opportunity it is to bring young leaders into the county and working on critical topical issues. So please convey my regrets to them. It was just the luck of the dice. But having said that, Mr. Rakoff, please.
Chair Bernie, Commissioners, thank you very much. I think
Sorry, one last time. While you're talking, I will be leaving at some point. Commissioner Farr will assume the role of chair. I apologize, Mr. Rakoff.
Well, and thank you. And what a good reason for you to have to step out and represent the county. I greatly appreciate the effort. Let me add my appreciation to all of the work done in Health and Human Services and throughout the county, and your work as well to get us to the milestone event of 65%. I know that it is the start of great things for us. I saw Ben Clark just for a minute, and it'd be tremendous to have Professor Clark join me. There we are. So thank you very much. This is the Policy Lab report outs from the work that has recently been done. Let me just start by saying it really is a tremendous partnership between the U of O and Lane County, and the Lane County's in a unique position. To the best of our knowledge, we know we're the only general service government working with the U of O in this way, with the School of Planning, Public Policy and Management, particularly the Institute of Policy Research and Engagement. It's a collaboration that really has paid dividends in a lot of ways. We are in the third year of a 3-year contract, and we will be asking you to extend the contract for another 3 years, and you'll have a chance to weigh in and see for yourself the merits of us continuing. Today, you're going to be receiving reports from the current projects. Some of these projects have been year-long endeavors, and some have been term-long, 10-week endeavors. The projects are generated from throughout the county, leadership at all levels. There's a certain amount of coordination that Ben and I are involved with to make sure that we can figure out a bite-sized chunk of research that can be practically done in the time given. So again, you'll see those pieces today. These reports really are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the relationship. This engagement with faculty and students at the U of O has a lot of intangibles that you won't necessarily see. It's really mutually beneficial in terms of leveraging, building, recruiting talent. These are individuals who, most of whom I'd love to see working at Lane County. And we have our chance in working with them to make our best case for Lane County as a community to reside in, and Lane County in particular is a place to work. This work also inspires staff. Those of us that have had a chance to work on these projects have found ourselves needing to up our game. It advances our skills, our knowledge, our perspectives. So as we look at these report outs, recognize that there's a lot behind the scenes that is less tangible, but is truly beneficial for Lane County. With that, Ben, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here before all of you, Chair Bernie and the rest of the commission. The partnership that we've had with Lane County, for the last 3+ years has been a tremendous resource for our students. And I'm really excited for the opportunity for them to be able to be here today and show off some of the work that they've been doing. As Greg said, this has been a great pipeline for new talent into Lane County. I know numerous of the graduates that have gone through some of these projects have ended up working with Lane County and as well as other governments across the state. We've been able to leverage this policy lab support from Lane County to more than triple the amount of money that y'all have put into it through grant funding, through support from the University of Oregon as well. So the investment is really paying off for our students, and I would argue also for Lane County as well. It's given the students a real critical level of experience to be able to present for y'all, but also to work on these projects with the staff, and it's been a phenomenal experience over these last 3 years. We've been able to fill in gaps of capacity. We know you are a lean organization, and so the students really give an opportunity to add to the talents that are already there and do things that you just don't quite have the resources available for it. And I've really seen also, given the last year with the COVID-19 response, our ability to collaborate was really enhanced by the fact that we've had this policy lab in place for the last 3 years. And I would say additionally with the response to the Holiday Farm fire and the work that we've been able to do on that front. So I will here pass off before we get behind schedule, since we were a little ahead of schedule, to our first group that's going to be presenting on some of this issues around natural hazard mitigation. We've got a couple of presentations around the Holiday Farm fire, 2 presentations around using that homelessness management information system, and then 2 presentations around trying to enhance the work on equity in the government using the equity lens in the strategic plan. So I will mute myself and pass it over to Coram Ketchum from an MPA Capstone Group, who will be presenting now. Thank you.
And Professor Clark, I'll mention that we have seamlessly handed the gavel over from the chair to me, the vice chair, and it will equally seamlessly hand back when he returns.
Great, let me see. Oops, I'm muted. There we go. Give me 1 second to begin my presentation. Thank you all for having me here. From the beginning, please show my screen. Hopefully you're seeing a presentation and not my notes. Yes? Are they swapped? Oh goodness. This is why we use Zoom. 1 second, everybody. Okay, can you see the left screen? Yeah, I'll run it from here. Okay. So my name is Coram Ketchum. I am part of the LRC Capstone Group. We've been working with Lane County and the Lane Regional Resiliency Collaborative to kickstart their work in natural hazards resiliency collaboration. That is finding new projects and new ways to address natural hazards in Lane County. Just a little overview of what we're going to be doing here. I'll introduce myself and my teammates who could make it today, run through our findings, and then give you a timeline of where we're going from here. So the IPRE staff team, Josh Bruce, Ben Clark, and Michael Howard. Ben Clark, our professor, has been an excellent resource in guiding us through this process, as well as our project advisor, Michael Howard, and Josh Bruce are part of the Oregon Partnership for Disaster Resilience, which has been connecting resources for local governments and community development groups to best practices in natural hazard resiliency. My teammates Alex Jonas and Jeremy Spalding, both MPAs, been crucial in helping this process along. And then the 13 members of the LRC, local governments and special bodies. So really the purpose of this project is to catalyze action in natural hazard mitigation by connecting best practices to current natural hazard mitigation activities to available funding streams to create a hazard mitigation prospectus or a way forward for the LRC to implement these kinds of changes that they want to see in natural hazards mitigation. So just an overview of the history of this process. This began as a FEMA grant process to catalyze further collaboration in Lane County. That kicked off a series of capstone investigations. On the prior year, if it starts sounding familiar, where a capstone team laid out the groundwork on how you would structure a collaborative like this and what its work plan, what its staffing should look like, which began the process of forming the LRC, which was put on hold due to little things like a global pandemic and a massive wildfire. So now our group, the Capstone Team 2, is here to put it back on track and recommend some actions that the group can take to continue to address natural hazard mitigation. So I'll run you through our best practices that we came from our literature review, the gaps analysis, so what we saw looking at current actions, turning that into some action areas where we think that traction can be made, some progress can be made in addressing natural hazards in the region. What are the available kind of funding streams for those actions? And then kind of a conclusion, where are we going from here? Within the literature review, it was really clear that collaboration takes leadership. It takes a common understanding. It takes the legal frameworks in place to be able to act. It takes having a shared set of ideas, whether that's their mission, whether that's your outcome, your goals, and the processes and the metrics you'll take to actually get there. So you can compare progress, as well as being able to collaborate across sectors between the public and private, between the public sector and the nonprofit sector, in order to activate everybody who is a stakeholder in natural hazard mitigation, which is the entire economy. So with that in mind, we set off on an interview process where we asked questions about collaboration, where we asked questions about missions, about the kind of actions that various emergency managers in Lane County were taking. So we got 16 different interviews from across the county, representing voices from each of the 3 regions that you see on the map, digging into the actions that they were going to be taking in natural hazard mitigations, what hazards they're addressing, what hazards they wish they were addressing, what they need to actually make progress if they're falling behind, what they can contribute if they join the collaboration, what they need from the collaborative going forward. In talking to all these people, it was clear, especially in rural Oregon or rural Lane County, that there's definitely a lack of capacity. The emergency managers working on this kind of work are few and far between, and it's often just a part of their many complicated work plan. Leadership is vital. There's not really one voice that's taking the lead to direct all the action from this collaborative. Communications infrastructure in the county is weak, particularly in the example of the Holiday Farm Fire that was within everybody's imagination. The radios went out multiple times in the middle of a blackout fire event. I'm sure that doesn't need any more explaining, as well as a lack of communication across the various stakeholders of the LRC, the local governments, the cities, and the connection to the county, especially some of the more rural cities feeling that they're less connected to the process of mitigating hazards in Lane County, are kind of last to hear about changes in pandemic policy or fire resiliency, those kinds of things. So after hearing everything we got from local emergency managers, we concurrently reviewed local natural hazards mitigation plans and related policies, as well as local capital improvement plans. Those are all listed in front of you. But just trying to really dig into those and scrape out the 500 plus actions that each of these governments are taking to address or considering to address natural hazard mitigation, and see where those actions overlap with other neighboring governments and the county. So some things that came out of that: seismic vulnerabilities. A lot of governments are addressing earthquake vulnerability through their planning. That makes sense. Capital improvement plans are a place to do that. Communications equipment is a list on everybody's kind of planning documents and comes up again in interviews. And a need for capacity, leadership, and financing to actually push these projects forward. A lot of these actions either are planned or are going to be planned, but don't have either the champions or the money that actually would push that process forward. So Pathfinder projects, this is where the meat of our presentation is going to be. culminating the interviews, the gaps analysis, and our best practices, we've come up with 8 or so Pathfinder projects organized by region. These are organized by ease versus impact. So what kinds of projects are going to be easy to accomplish and will be very impactful if they're implemented? Where are they located? Do they reflect the current needs of the emergency managers that are there? And can we actually connect these to funding sources so that they don't remain just projects, or just ideas become actionable projects? So roll through really quickly. So quick wins, these are the places that we recommend the collaborative start. The timeline of this, completed within 1 or 2 years. These are going to be easier to do than the rest of the projects, and they'll be highly impactful in our estimate, putting them in that right quadrant on our ease versus impact scale. That being hazard response memorandum of agreement, so getting our local governments and utilities in place to be able to respond to down power lines, evacuation notices, uses of infrastructure, those kinds of things. And then a regional asset mapping within each of the 3 regions, Coast, Valley, Cascades, to have a greater awareness of what actual assets that the emergency managers there have on hand, because all disaster response is going to be local to a large degree until national resources are mobilized. So the other projects that we recommend that the LRC consider, phase wins. These are projects that will have some early actions that can get traction, but will need to happen on a longer timeline. In this case, that is rural resiliency resources. So what kinds of ways can we add capacity to the rural emergency managers and rural governments that we have already in the county? Our recommendations around that are capacity training, NIMS, ICS training, war games, those kinds of things, so they understand their role in the emergency, as well as additional staffing and officers that can represent those rural voices across the county in these conversations, as well as communications infrastructure. Some things like buying new radios are going to be easier things to do that'll be impactful, but what do we look down the line to build out new fiber smart grid technology, to put up new comms towers so that we don't have these kinds of communications outages again. Some other actions that we could be taking as a collaborative, greater community engagement. This is going to be a lower impact on our estimate, but also a way to build momentum. So working with community groups like COAD, the Community Disaster Resiliency Organization in Lane County, or working with other local governments to link and combine programming around things like FireWise, 2 weeks ready for vulnerable population, those sorts of ideas. And then moving into more longer term solutions that are going to be difficult to implement, but need to be considered now. To the asset mapping project earlier, but citing emergency stockpiles within each of the 3 regions. Once the asset mapping is completed, so that we have an understanding of what we can rely on while supplies are coming in case of a massive earthquake. Traffic in and out of the county can be cut off for weeks or months at a time, so having these stockpiles on hand would be key. One thing we've heard again is it's hard to get into these seismic grants. There's going to be some money coming down the pipe from the Biden administration, hopefully. These grant processes are really onerous. Can the county and the governments around it put in collectively for an ask for bridge money, and then share their capacity in their grant writing so that they can all get their money more easily? And evacuation route planning in key areas along the coast and in the McKenzie River Valley, so that when the next major event happens, that they can have an orderly exit and get everybody to safety. So just to show these projects on the map, the blue circles are evacuation route studies. The gold circle is where evacuation routes are currently being planned. The red tabs are we're calling lifeline bridges that are part of the bridge seismic grant process. And the other icons are dotted locations of places for community engagement and other kinds of projects throughout the area. There are 8 applicable projects that can happen in the Cascades. Our recommended priority would be building out communications infrastructure. There are 6 applicable projects within the coast. Our priority would be that rural capacity building. And there are 4 applicable projects in the valley, and our recommended priority would be those memoranda of agreement, so that responding to winter storms and future disasters can be done more smoothly. Running low time. run through our grant and fundraising database. So we've pulled together 60 plus sources of funding. This will be hosted publicly online, and then try to connect these to various hazards and mitigation programs and source them from different places across the funding spectrum to create kind of resiliency and diversity of funding sources for the LRC to be doing some of their fundraising activities. Some of those key examples being in the area of rural communications, the telecommunications, FEMA resiliency grants, grants from the state of Oregon, and then some private grants from like MJ Murdoch. The key one that I would highlight here would be the Oregon's Homeland Security Grant Program, which does provide money for staffing, which is rare in these kinds of grant cycles. It would be an excellent way to start building up some of that capacity. So we're going to go from here. Over the summer, we're going to be working to finalize the FEMA grant, wrap up a deliverable. Part of that is going to be a complete disaster resiliency plan for the county. A lot of these funding windows are going to be opening and closing over the next about 6 months. So we recommend that the powers that be considering these options as quickly as possible, because we're in a brief community readiness window where there's a lot of energy and action from COVID and the wildfires that have created an understanding that we need to be doing this kind of work, but that kind of energy doesn't last forever. So what can we do now to actually move that ball forward in during a special moment? So we really recommend that the collaborative begin by hiring a doer, an administrator to be taking in on some of these actions, officialize itself through the ORS 190 process, that become an official special government, convene and communicate regularly, start taking some of these recommendations, really, really use this moment. And I cannot stress how brief this window is to be doing some of these actions.
Just go to.
Work with IPRI and some of the local community groups to actually begin implementing some of these steps. Whirlwind tour, but our emails are available here at the bottom if you have any questions. And thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Ketchum, for a whirlwind presentation. And board, we have 6 group presentations in our 90-minute allocation. This presentation, including Professor Clark's preamble, took about 17 minutes. So without further ado, I will forego questions unless there are pressing questions from Mr. Ketchum and move along to our second, Professor Clark, to our second presentation. Any pressing questions from the Board of Commissioners? Then Mr. Clark, we're ready. Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Just briefly, not so much a question as a comment for consideration is I saw very little about water and water supply and in disaster preparedness and disaster planning. And so just, we don't need to have a conversation about it now, but in the future, I would love to hear about your work to understand the resources through the various local utilities and other resources for ensuring clean water is available to folks during disaster.
Thank you, Commissioner Trieger. And Professor Clark, I'll move along to you. We do have a little bit of latitude beyond the 90-minute limit, the 90 minutes we've established for this agenda item, but we do have one more item to consider, which is the grant and the contract with the University of Oregon before our hard stop at noon. So Professor Clark, I'll go back to you.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, we should have no problem staying on time. Several of the next presentations are pre-recorded, and so we know exactly how long those are going to be. I believe Jeff Kincaid will be loading those up for us to get on the screen, since I didn't want to mess that up and get those videos rolling.
Diana, if you could play the group 2 video, and it's going to kick off right away right when she hits play. So thank you.
Actually, and everyone will be muted, so don't be surprised when you see yourselves muted. One moment, and I will get that going.
Good morning. Today we will be presenting our research project on holiday farm fire recovery and resilience. Next slide. So we are working with Lane County Land Management on this project to produce a final report and story map website, which will serve as our deliverable and our communication tool for reaching the public. If you would like to see our story map, we will include it on the last slide and in the chat at the end of the presentation. We do want to acknowledge that this project is based on changing information and legislation that will potentially have an effect on recovery and rebuilding processes and policies. The team consists of Bethany Hayes-Alston, Donovan LeMay, and myself, Mariah Mulcahy. We will start off with highlights from the literature, and then Donovan will take us through our interview strategies and themes. And then finally, Bethany will conclude with our GIS analysis and recommendations. Next slide, great. Okay, so first off, we are all aware of the fires that occurred this past fall, but the sake of our project, it's important to understand the severity of the recovery and its very long-term implications. The McKenzie River and Willamette Valley is important to Lane County and all residents in the area. And in 2020, the Holiday Farm Fire burned down over 700 structures, with at least 400 of them being dwellings. Now, in regards to the literature, an important aspect of wildfire is resilience and mitigation and preparedness. So this graphic demonstrates 3 aspects of fire resilience: defensible space, fire-resistant landscaping, and building with fire-resistant materials. So defensible space is to protect the home and to provide a lack of vegetation if a fire was to occur. Fire-resistant landscaping is similar to that, just throughout the whole property. And then we have rebuilding with fire-resistant materials and recovery. So when building with fire-resistant materials, you have the chance of living out that wildfire and not losing your home. Next slide, please. So all of the positives to living in rural areas in recent years, altered forest conditions, climate change, and the increasing number of homes built in fire-prone areas have ended in wildfires, and ultimately affecting more communities and more individuals. With that being said, our literature and research have been focused on resilience and recovery. One of the biggest themes that came from the literature was in regards to the previous mentioned graphic with fire preparedness and the motivation for homeowners to mitigate their chance of a wildfire. We found through our lit review that home ignitability during fires depends on the characteristics of the home and its immediate surroundings. We also found that common sense, aesthetics, and social interactions all play a role in motivating fire mitigation. When we looked to the literature for rebuilding and recovery, we found that communities permanently change in a variety of ways. The research provided suggests that there's a shared responsibility among the community to rebuild and also recover. And it's also important for the community to receive timely access to services. In terms of recovery from wildfire, it takes years of planning, action, support, and collaborative efforts. When rebuilding, it does allow for opportunity to build with fire resiliency in mind. An abundance of those who experience loss face financial difficulties and the overwhelming stress of fire recovery for the years to follow. Aside from the literature, we also received information through case studies from Grant County, Lake County, and Okanogan County. Aspects that worked well in their recovery was their flexibility with community members who had experienced loss. They also decided to waive application fees for fire victims who are applying to rebuild. Some of the obstacles that they encountered was the amount of structures that were lost. Some of them did not meet the dwelling requirements for rebuilding. They also found a decent amount of property owners were underinsured and were expected to face large obstacles when rebuilding. Now I'm going to pass it on to Donovan for our interview strategies and themes.
Thanks, Mariah. We interviewed dozens of federal, state, county, and special district governments, also nonprofits and utilities in the McKenzie River area. We asked interviewees about the response, their role, and reactions to the wildfire. But during the wildfire, there was a loss of power. This disruption affected water pumps that could have been used to fight the fire. Not every utility is taking advantage of hazard mitigation grant programs. Overall, local organizations were satisfied with the emergency response. The recovery was initially slow, but Lane County's added capacity to help property owners with requests and permits and documents. After the fire was put out, several groups reported a better relationship with the county. They were really impressed with the incident command structure. Next slide. So these are the top ideas that came out of 30 interviews. There are opportunities between organizations to communicate better with each other, such as firefighters and the water utilities. Organizations are expecting the county to reach out with guidance before, during, and after emergencies. Resilience is a capacity to keep working through a disaster, and many organizations did not have an emergency response plan before the fire, and they still don't. The remaining themes are concerned with making rebuilding as easy as possible and more resistant to future disasters. Now, Bethany will detail our mapping analysis.
So as part of our investigation, our team conducted a social equity analysis of the populations in the Holiday Farm fire affected area to help Lane County incorporate their strategic lens of equity into the recovery process. All of our maps are available for viewing on our Story Map website, but we've selected a couple maps to share today. This is a map showing the Social Vulnerability Index, and this includes people in poverty, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, renters, people over 65 years of age, and people with disabilities. This index is specifically highlighting areas that have higher concentrations of people with these identities because they are potentially more vulnerable to environmental disasters because many of these groups have been historically underserved, and these areas with the higher concentrations are shown in dark gray. This map demonstrates that there's a high concentration of populations vulnerable to disasters, especially in that central area that encompasses Nimrod, Finrock, and Blue River. This map shows another index called the Vulnerable Homeowners Index. And our team created this to highlight the unique challenges of rural Lane County residents. This index includes poverty, homeownership, and adults over 65 to show how many potentially vulnerable homeowners live in the Holiday Farm fire affected area, and the more concentrated areas are shown in dark green. The resulting map shows that the west and central parts of the affected area scored as high, and the eastern area showed as medium. And these results of the data analysis help to inform the team's recommendations. So our recommendations follow 3 key themes, which are disaster resilience, reducing roadblocks, and community engagement. So first of all, we'd like to talk a little bit about our disaster resilience related recommendations. Our first recommendation is to increase staffing, specifically emergency management and hazard mitigation staffing needs to be increased because so many rural communities in Lane County do not have a city government to turn to, and they look to the county during emergencies. We would also like to see grant assistance for rural communities. This could be a little bit of staff time or maybe an intern who could help small communities and utilities on acquiring grants such as FEMA grants. We would also like to see leadership strengthened. The county could encourage and educate smaller public sector agencies to do their own emergency planning. And then lastly, we would like to see roads strengthened. This will help with like emergency accessibility and disaster resilience. And for infrastructure that was damaged during the Holiday Farm fire, we wanted to note that FEMA will cover up to 75% of the costs. Another theme in our recommendations was reducing roadblocks. We would like to see the county promoting subsidies. There's an EWEB subsidy for property owners that rebuild away from the river. And the county could, support that, promote it on its websites. We would also like to see temporary housing being allowed. People could be allowed to have a temporary trailer on their property while rebuilding. A regulatory system could be created to verify that the waste is going into a proper septic system. This would promote social equity and affordable housing accessibility, and it will really just give people a place to stay while waiting for builders to become available to rebuild their properties. But lastly, a theme of our recommendations was community engagement. So we would like to see communication being strengthened. The county should communicate policies and the rationale behind them clearly to the affected community so that it's clear that the policy decisions were reached in a thoughtful manner and are not simply roadblocks. We would like to see the county collaborate with the affected community to reach shared solutions or to at least engage in a dialogue. We also wanted the county to be aware that there are really high rates of older adults in the affected community, so care and attention should be paid to how accessible the planning process and communication strategies are. And then lastly, we wanted to share the link to our story map, which is hffstory.us. This is our community engagement tool to help the county communicate with the public about the work that is occurring behind the scenes with University of Oregon researchers. Thank you.
All right.
We have employment applications from each of those three presenters. Mr. Clark, back to you.
Okay, great. I just want to point out those first two presentations were based on year-long projects. So we started working with them in the beginning of October, and they're just finishing up this week. And the next four presentations are based on our spring term alone. So they've had, well, the term is 10 weeks. They probably only had about 8 weeks to work on it. So they're really formative projects trying to help us figure out what to work on these year-long projects over the next year or two. All right. So Diane, I think at this point, we'll start the group 3 video.
Hi, my name is Julia Fox. I'm here with Ashley Bamey, Olivia Mannon, William Sullivan, and Peyton Wagner, and we're from the University of Oregon School of Planning, Public Policy, and Management, here to present our findings on homeless management information systems in Lane County. Next slide, please. So for our agenda today, we will begin with an introduction into Lane County and HMIS use, as well as our project. Next, we will detail best practices with HMIS with other cities. And then we will detail our project, our current project, and our findings. And we will end with a conclusion with recommendations and next steps for future project work in this area. Next slide, please. So to begin with our introduction, our current findings for Lane County homelessness data, we found that Lane County is one of the most, has one of the most significant chronic homelessness issues in the United States. In 2019, 57 out of 10,000 residents in Lane County experienced homelessness, which means that Lane County is ranking in the 19th highest per capita homelessness rate in the United States. Lane County saw a 32% rise in homelessness from 2018 to 2019. Past and present actions by Lane County to address homelessness, most importantly for our project, we found that in 2005, Lane County began using HMIS, also known as Homeless Information Management Systems, which provides a valuable way to generate relevant and actionable data for local counties. Our project, we set out to provide a case study in how HMIS is used in Lane County and how this data could be better collected and utilized for informed decision-making and resource allocation. The methods that we used for this, we began by interviewing current system users and local government staff in Lane County, and we also examined how other jurisdictions manage their data. Our findings and research, we hope, will have produced valuable recommendations for Lane County, as well as important next steps for future project work in this area. And now I'll pass it off to my teammate Peyton to discuss best practices.
To learn about best practices in different cities, we did a lit review. The first one we did was called Shaking Up the Routine, how Seattle is implementing results-driven contracting practices to improve outcomes for people experiencing homelessness. In 2016, Seattle declared homelessness a civil emergency. The article discussed how capturing up-to-date data and achieving performance measures is an important component in service improvement, but the human component cannot be lost in that process. And there was a need to shift focus on performance outcomes rather than administrative measures. Another article we reviewed was called Dignity and Indignation, how people experiencing homelessness view services and providers. HMIS allows efficient movement of information, but it shifts focus from a person and their experience to numbers. The article pointed out a need for adding qualitative data along with HMIS data to offer a broader picture of the homelessness experience and to inform decision makers. The last article we reviewed was called What Cities Can Do to Combat Homelessness. This article was about a collaborative effort in Harris County, Texas, called The Way Home. They decided that they needed a universal term for or universal definition for homelessness, and they came up with the Housing First model, which provides permanent housing for individuals experiencing homelessness as the foundation from which their personal goals can then be pursued. Next, I will pass it on to Olivia, who will go over our project description.
So in collaboration with Lane County, our research team was tasked with providing an in-depth case study of how Lane County officials and its local service providers utilize the HMIS as a tool for making better informed decisions and managing its resources. Because we cannot access HMIS data directly, we designed our project as a qualitative overview of how Lane County officials, community partners, and other contracted service providers use the database to manage critical information about residents experiencing homelessness. Using contacts from Sarai Johnson, we conducted interviews with a number of individuals from several different service providers in the area. Interviewees were asked a range of questions concerning the services that their organization provide, how their organization used the database, and what, if any, possible improvements they would like to see within the system. All information collected from these interviews was processed and coded for commonalities, themes, similarities, and differences within responses. So next you'll be hearing from Ashley, and she's going to describe some of our findings.
Thank you, Olivia. Next slide, please. So our interviews illustrated several common themes: system design and user interface, ability to access and use the HMIS data effectively, and desire for more technical assistance and training support. Lane County's HMIS vendor is WellSky Community Services. Some of our service providers address the potential power of the system to facilitate needed improvements in service provision, grant preparation, and programmatic objectives. But there were significant obstacles in the current system's architecture. Thoughtful design and an intuitive interface would promote use and compliance, which means more reliable and actionable data in planning and policymaking. We also heard a lot about access to meaningful data. Considerable data are collected at intake, but some city officials have addressed their inability to access it without a formal request to the county. This hinders their ability to make informed decisions and measure effectiveness of programs. Service providers have also emphasized the need to customize data reports to fit the organization's internal needs. If the system is simply a mandated tool that is not otherwise effective for data tracking and goal setting, many service providers have looked elsewhere for systems that are easier to use and more adaptable to their current and future needs. This may lead to incomplete data in the county's HMIS and duplicated effort that would be better utilized in service provision. Lastly, we wanted to address the desire for more technical assistance and training support. Oftentimes, our service providers are working with small staffs with limited time to devote to data input. Building a unified continuum of care requires intentional coordination, communication, and training. Our service providers want to use the system correctly and well because they recognize the benefits of data in improving service and eliminating homelessness in the region. They believe this goal would be furthered through increased technical assistance, coaching, and ongoing training. Next, I will pass it to William to discuss a few of our recommendations and considerations for next steps.
Thank you, Ashley. So from these findings, we have a few preliminary items that we would like to highlight for the county's consideration and for further research. Firstly, interviewees indicated that the WellSky platform that is currently used for the HMIS could be replaced by a more user-friendly platform. A platform that is easier for service providers to use can encourage users to collect more data and better integrate the use of the HMIS into their existing responsibilities. However, a transition in database platforms also comes with concerns, including transitioning users to the new platform and importing existing homelessness data into a new system. Several interviewees expressed a desire for more technical assistance, coaching, and training. Additional assistance in using the HMIS would help service providers to make the most of the system for their organization's mission and to get their new hires and new users using the system proficiently. Regularly sharing data reports with staff members at Lane County cities would better empower them to address homelessness more efficiently and effectively. Of particular interest to city staff is which interventions are most cost-effective and demographic data that would allow cities to take a more culturally sensitive approach to addressing homelessness. Some other considerations would be made easier with additional staff capacity for Lane County's HMIS team. While HMIS use has grown, the staff that manages the system has not. An additional bandwidth could help to gather more extensive data and provide reporting to decision makers at the county, cities, and direct service provider organizations to more easily integrate data into their decisions. Lastly, Lane County maintains a Tableau dashboard with aggregated data on the number of residents experiencing homelessness. Adding further analysis to this tool and further publicizing it will inform and engage Lane County residents about the state of homelessness in the county. And next slide, please. And so these considerations that we've shared are preliminary and will be further explored by other students through their coursework in the University of Oregon School of Planning, Public Policy and Management, and through work with the school's Institute for Policy Research and Engagement. Over the summer, the Institute for Policy Research and Engagement will work with at least one intern on further study of Lane County's homelessness management information system. Our project team recommends that the intern create and widely disseminate a survey to direct service providers and public managers that do or would like to use the HMIS in order to better understand the current system strengths and weaknesses and how the HMIS allows for data-based decision-making. It is also the school's hope to have students as part of their two-term capstone applied research project to further engage with the HMIS in the new academic year. That concludes our presentation. We look forward to further exploration of the HMIS's role in driving decision-making around homelessness in Lane County, and we thank you for your time.
Speechless. That was an amazingly incisive and spot-on presentation. I look forward to hearing much more about that. Without direct questions or pressing questions from the Board of Commissioners, Professor Clark, back to you for the fourth presentation.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carr. Next up, we have another project that takes a similar question, but rests more solidly within the nonprofit community and work directly with Food for Lane County on this question with the HMS system. So we'll play the video for Group 4 now. Please, Diane. Thank you.
Everyone, we're in the School of Planning, Public Policy and Management in the class of Public Management, working on the project of HMIS for Food for Lane County. I'm Emily, and I'm here with Dan, Olivia, Cecilia, Hannah, and Rick. In this meeting, we will talk about the project and methodology, then the site visit, then the literature reviews, GIS, and then recommendations. Our job is to analyze and review information and data available to us and compare how Food for Lane County is doing in the food bank industry. We were able to provide recommendations and toolkits based off of our informational interview with Carrie Copeland, who is the Education and Programs Director for Food for Lane County, literature reviews and case studies, and our group was able to do an on-site visit. In the informational interview and the on-site visit, we asked many questions about data collection, revenue sources, partnerships, and how they run their food bank. We collaborated with another team that is also working on HMIS to emphasize and strengthen our findings. Unfortunately, we ran into the issue that neither of our groups were able to access the HMIS data due to confidentiality. I will now pass this to Cecilia to talk about the site visit.
Thank you, Emily. So these pictures are from the site visit we did. So we did a site visit to get a sense of how they operate and how the system work, partners they work with. And the left picture are boxes for partners to provide information they need. And we learn the great work they're doing and some challenges they face with. And I will hand it to Olivia, who will talk about some data challenge.
Thank you, Cecilia. The Department of Housing and Urban Development is the source of HMIS. Because of this, HUD publishes standards for usage, toolkits on how to utilize the data, and case studies on HMIS. Nonprofits receiving funding from HUD have obligations for data collection with HMIS, which are broken down based on the type of funding. Food for Lane County and their extensive network of partners are also using or collecting data for HMIS. They are currently having issues with data collection. In the past, attempts to collect data became barriers to services. Based on best practices and survey design, Food for Lane County asks inflammatory questions first making participants less likely to answer the demographic questions that follow. The online survey is extremely long, which makes individuals significantly less likely to complete it. And Food for Lane County also expressed difficulty entering and managing data once it's collected. A solution to this can be using trained professionals or graduate students to optimize this process in addition to reconstructing the surveys. Now on to Dan to discuss the case studies.
Looked at several case studies, one of which was looking at HUD's homeless assistant programs. It looked at 9 different communities and how they used HMIS to collect data. A common theme was most organizations did not know that the data they collected could be used. This added another layer of difficulties to the various nonprofits trying to serve the community. Due to survey design, the standard collection tools are often ineffective. Some key takeaways we found were, in Michigan, they identified that their primary clients of families served were children below the age of 10. West Michigan used the data to create a GIS weighted analysis. This allowed them to identify hotspots of areas in need, as well as break down the data by demographics. Pennsylvania created scorecards that identified repeat customers. This allowed them to find new ways to assist those individuals become more food secure. And now to Rick, he will talk about collecting and implementing GIS data.
Thanks, Dan. With recommendations from Food for Lane County Management, we searched for answers to help with the geospatial information services options from other agencies that are addressing food insecurities. We were able to find many agencies using a host of different GIS related tools and analysis to help to identify the need and where it is needed the most. With lessons learned from similar agencies, GIS and its use can help identify many different indicators regarding place-based needs. A very common GIS tool used for such identifying needs is the US Census, and more so the American Community Survey, which is a great resource for demographics, economics, housing, social characteristics, and a host of other potential identifiers. Using the identifiers, one way a GIS professional can assist is to perform a weighted analysis, giving each indicator a weight or a point on a numeric scale, followed by compiling the weights and search for the areas with the most weight or points. Using the aforementioned type of analysis as a starting point and including knowledge from partner agencies and participants, the data can then be bolstered by using information provided by local surveys and then followed by a descriptive text analysis. I would now like to hand it over to Hannah for some recommendations.
Thanks, Rick. So to wrap things up, we have some general recommendations for improving the usage of HMIS. Our first recommendation is to improve data collection methods. This could be in the form of improving surveys, questionnaires, or documents and records. Having improved surveys and questionnaires allows for better understanding of what certain needs are and with what demographics those needs are most associated with. Our second recommendation is to hire individuals to collect, enter, and convert data into usable information. Spilling off of the first recommendation, there are many students and recent graduates who have a lot of skills in data collection and research using various software systems. In terms of GIS collection, LCOG, Lane County GIS, and University of Oregon's Geography Department are all able to collect and maintain GIS information. This is important to have a specified professional or a team of professionals to collect, enter, maintain, and organize this data collection. And last, our third recommendation is to create a GIS heat map that can track demographics along with area data. Creating a GIS heat map further enables local organizations and Lane County to identify where certain demographics are located to better assist those populations and their needs. For example, Food for Lane County's mission is to create access to food. Knowing where food deserts, certain homeless populations like homeless youth, or other demographics are located in the county allows for better service of this mission, more efficiently get food to people in need. And then next you will see our Works Cited. And this concludes our presentation. So thank you again for your time. And if you have any questions, Rick will be happy to answer them. Thank you.
pounds of food per year. It is the largest regional food bank in food distribution capacity per capita in the Western United States. And without pressing questions from the board, and I'm looking directly at you, Commissioner Trieger, this is your area. We will move along back to Professor Clark, unless Commissioner Trieger, I'm going to give you an opportunity at the mic.
Thank you, Vice Chair Farr. I think just in the interest of time, I would just love to follow up with students to learn more about those heat maps and understand better what they represent and how we could be using them to more effectively target some services and to understand the populations that we're serving. Thank you so much for the presentation. Very much appreciated.
Thanks, Commissioner. I will make a note that I was Executive Director of Food for Lane County for a number of years, and Commissioner Trieger and I worked literally side by side in much of the work that you're citing. Professor Clark, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And we can make sure that we can have some connections with the students moving forward for any additional questions, either later on in the presentation today or over the summer. Next, pass it over to Simran Gillespie, who will be doing another live presentation, and let him drive from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are you able to hear me? Okay. All right. So thank you, Lane County Board of Commissioners, for this opportunity. This presentation will cover applying the equity lens while avoiding cultural tax. This presentation was prepared by myself, Simran Gillespie, as well as Jinyu Lee, Imani Lindberg, Hatsue Sato, and Strick Yamada. Today, we're going to cover the project description, defining the scope of the work, our literature review, and interviews, and what does this mean for public managers. So our description was to include the equity and decision making without creating cultural tax on Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, BIPOC communities. How can we implement the equity lens without taxing BIPOC communities? So what is a cultural tax? It's a burden placed upon people of color to do the work of building diversity. A cultural tax places demands on Black and Indigenous people of color individuals to educate about racism, discriminatory practices, and white supremacy. It also takes repeated questions and it often asks of people of color to fulfill roles in the community and to be representatives of the larger community, which they may or may not as individuals be able to do so. There's often creates an individual burden asking individuals to be a representative that they're not able to fulfill. In our literature review, we covered a number of key points and takeaways here that their community voices are critical to developing policy, right? So when we're developing new policy decisions, we want to make sure that the communities can see themselves in the policy. So we want to make sure to take time to include people of color and make sure that they are represented. However, people of color are often asked to serve in advisory roles or to take on informal positions which are not tied directly to their work and do not offer career advancement, which means that they're asked to engage in tasks that will not advance their personal careers. And protective managerial action is necessary to prevent this, which means that managers need to be able to recognize if their employees are being asked to perform a role based on, for instance, their ethnicity, rather than on their expertise, or rather than based on their participation in civic organizations and so forth. And so it's important for managers to recognize and be able to sort of be protective of the time of their employees. In the course of our work, we interviewed Equity and Access Coordinator Mo Young with Lane County. Also, we reached out to Multnomah County, the City of Portland, Professor Jose Melendez with the University of Oregon, and the chair of the Lane County Equity and Access Advisory Board. A few key takeaways were to the idea of developing a muscle memory that when doing this work, we want to see the equity lens as a baseline. So anytime we're developing a new policy, that we're able to rely on the skills that we've learned. And we also want to understand that this work exists on all levels. So anytime that an agency is interacting with the public, that they're doing equity work, because we're always engaging with all members of the community, right? So we need tools of evaluation that should drive action. So we want to understand what are the outcomes of our projects, how is it affecting communities, and be able to have good tools to be able to say, is this working? Is this helping our communities? And there needs to be training and accountability, particularly from managers who will be able to identify if there's a problem, saying, you know, we can't move forward without X, Y, and Z. And that might be reaching out to the Office of Equity and Access. That might be thinking about who are the key stakeholders and how is this going to impact communities. We also want to understand equity not just as a lens that we might take on or off to view something, but understanding this as foundational and as a framework that undergirds all of the work and policies across departments. So what does this mean for managers? Particularly, it means ongoing training and resources for both managers and employees. It's also crucial that managers be carrying out the equity lens work at the managerial level. We don't want to see frontline workers having to turn to their coworkers or ask their managers to implement the equity lens. It should be applied uniformly across departments, right? We also want to see departmental work and collaboration with the Office of Equity and Access. Repeatedly came up with the idea of, can we have people come early, come often, approach the office to do this work? We also want to seek representation from partner organizations and stakeholders, and afford those participants a decision-making role. So we want to avoid seeking involvement from individuals whose work is not directly tied to the process, right? Again, we don't want to be asking people because of their ethnicity only to be serving in these roles, but instead to be advising from partner organizations, community organizations, stakeholders, and people who are involved, and making sure that that's not a pro forma role, but that they have decision-making vote. Also, managers again, should be protective of employees' time, and particularly should be aware to ensure that people of color employees are not asked or pressured to participate in tokenizing positions, asked to perform something based on their ethnicity rather than on their role in the work that they're doing for the county. And then broadly for county institutions, that the Office of Equity and Access must have representation in a process where accountability can be leveraged. A few suggestions for this were at a point of financial decision making. So if there is a place where budgets are submitted, to ask, how is equity applied to these budgets? Or at an administrative body, when new policies are announced or brought up at a managerial level, so that we can ask at that time, how are we applying the equity lens in this, to be made aware of it anytime new policies are being developed. And there should be a standardized process in the developing of new projects and policies, particularly at an early point, to sort of check in and say, how is this going, and to work with the Office of Equity and Access. There should also be an ongoing review, particularly every 6 months, for new projects, to see how is this impacting communities. Are there major or minor changes we need to make sure that we are being inclusive in what we're doing? And that there should be ongoing training and resources developed as part of new employee orientations, employee support groups, and additional resources and training for employees generally. I want to thank again my co-presenters, Jinyu Lee, Imani Lindberg, Hatsue Sato, and Srik Yamato, who helped make this presentation possible. Our emails are here. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you to the presentation board. Excellent job. Without pressing questions from the Board of County Commissioners, Professor Clark, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And we'll be finishing up with another video presentation. This one also looking at the equity lens. So if we could get the Group 6 video queued up and rolling, Diane, that would be spectacular. Thank you.
Professor Clark.
Hello, all. We will be talking about equity in decision-making and removing roadblocks to that process. So it will be presented by Angela, Allison, Colin, Erica, and myself. Our research and findings are centered on achievement of racial and social equity and how to operationalize such a goal through effective utilization of the adopted Equity Lens tool. Recent political and social contexts have brought issues of inequity to the forefront of public consciousness nationwide and regionally throughout the Pacific Northwest. Although the concept of equity has been philosophized and studied for centuries, remaining a public value that is worth continuously striving for. Now, by affirming it as a priority, local government leaders as well as staff are committing to aiding in a cultural evolution that spans wider than 4,700 square miles. Meaningful and impactful implementation of the Equity Lens tool so that it leads to specific organizational outcomes is certainly an arduous yet prudent endeavor. The data analysis and recommendations presented here offer valuable insights as well as opportunity for capacity building in order to provide an even higher quality of services to current and future generations within Lane County. Now I'll pass it along to Colin.
Thank you, Carrie. To learn about the history and present state of the Equity Lens, we spoke to Mo Young and Greg Rickoff in Lane County Administration. We also attended EAB advisory meetings and interviewed the co-chairs of that group. Finally, we spoke to managers at equity departments in Portland and Multnomah County who have been using Equity Lens tools for many years. Lane County is just one of hundreds of localities adopting this type of tool across the US and Canada, so we are just beginning to explore what has worked well elsewhere. And I'll pass it on to Allison. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. So I wanted to provide an explanation for the graphic that you all can see on the screen here. Our group wanted to find a visual way of interpreting our data, so we generated a word cloud from our interviews. Word cloud showcased the frequency of words and placed the most common word in the largest font in the center of the graphic. As you can see, the most frequent topics from our interviews were equity, inclusion, accountability, and facilitation. While the concepts of equity and inclusion were discussed equally by all interviewees, the concept of accountability came up the most from our interviews with Ben Duncan and Dr. Markeisha Smith from Multnomah County and the City of Portland, respectively. These two individuals have plenty of experience implementing an equity lens and shared their knowledge with us. The concept of facilitation appeared throughout our interview with Sarah Salisbury, who is an expert in the field of change management theory. The interviews we conducted helped us understand what members from Lane County want the equity lens to look like in the future. Currently, Lane County is in the very early stages of implementing this equity lens, so there are many possibilities for incorporating the lens throughout county management. These interviews also taught us what other administrators learned from working with an equity lens elsewhere in Oregon. Our recommendations for the implementation of the equity lens center around the topics of accountability and facilitation, and I'll pass it on to Angela to explain our recommendations.
We will now wrap up the presentation with our 4 recommendations for Lane County. Our first recommendation is for Lane County to fully develop an equity, access, and inclusion department. Currently, the county has an equity and access coordinator, Mo Young, and has budgeted for a director. We suggest Lane County continues to develop the department and hire on more full-time staff. This will show that the county is fully committed to equity, access, and inclusion, and has the staff time committed to help make sure the equity lens is implemented as smoothly as possible. Lane County employees participate in 3 hours of DEI training a year and a new Diversity 101 course starting this summer. Our second recommendation is for the county to encourage professional and personal development of its employees. We suggest the county encourage employees to seek and attend lectures, conferences, and optional county trainings surrounding current DEI topics. An important aspect of DEI learning is continued education. When employees complete a training once a year, there's no space for them to build on this training. The more opportunities employees have to learn and discuss DEI, the more comfortable and likely they will be to implement the equity lens in their department and day-to-day work. And now I will hand the last 2 recommendations off to Erica.
Thank you, Angela. So in meeting with leaders with Equity Lens experience in Oregon, we learned of the needs to have a tool that would allow department and county managers to trace how employees are connecting with the lens, not at just one point in time, but through regular tracking. It is important that the county consider important questions of how the lens is working for them and with them. These questions include, how are employees connecting with training and the equity lens? How is active engagement measured? And how can employees and citizens provide feedback? So our third recommendation is that the county utilize available software, for example, what is already used to roll out DEI-focused trainings, to track what trainings are completed by which employees. Then ask for employee feedback throughout the year on how the employees have implemented the knowledge they've gained from trainings and how they've utilized the equity lens in their work. Department managers could work with the newly formed department to take any necessary reaction or precautionary actions that would ensure engagement with the lens is positive. In the same light, it would be helpful to collect data on both employee and citizen perception of lens satisfaction, both to see where they can improve, but also be able to share successes within the county so departments can learn from others' successes too. Finally, we recommend considering future research. So through our research and discussions with local leaders, we know there's more to learn on how best to strengthen the equity lens. And for that reason, we recommend University of Oregon School of Planning, Public Policy, and Management students continue to support Lane County administration with equity lens evaluation. So future researchers can consider consultations with local governments that have used equity lenses, including but not limited to Des Moines, Iowa, San Antonio, Texas, and Toronto, Ontario. And we also recommend conducting interviews with administrators of other types of organizations, such as school districts. These entities may have learned lessons about equity lens evaluation that would be applicable to county government as well.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you all for listening to our presentation. We will now take any questions that you have.
All right, with that, if we can, there we go.
Thank you again for your time.
So you've had the 6 presentations. I think we're now ready to entertain questions and comments.
Thank you, Ms. Rickoff. Questions and or comments, questions about the specific presentations or comments about the program in general to the Board of County Commissioners? Commissioner Buck.
I'll start us off. I want to appreciate all the time and effort that the students went into researching each and every one of these ideas and strategies, all quite relevant to the things that we do every single day here at the county. There are items on each one of these that I want to delve into further. And I know, as Mr. Rickoff mentioned, this is just the tip of the iceberg for many of these ideas, and that this will be an ongoing effort. You know, there was a lot of good work with the LRRC group that we were doing before the pandemic hit, and it had a lot of energy. And I look forward to seeing us all come back together and resuming all that work. I remember having the meetings in Harris Hall and the students helping facilitate all of us through some really good collaborative meetings that are still needed today. So I'm so glad that they were able to touch on that again and remind us that that good work it was still working a little bit in the background there with the students. And hopefully as we come out of this pandemic, we can find ways to come back together on that particular item. Of course, the Holiday Farm Fire Group 2 item hits home for me because that's what I've been working on quite a bit since the fire occurred. And I noted one item in particular, which was emergency planning grants for those agencies in unincorporated Lane County that don't have a city or local government to help them with. I too have found that as a barrier for a lot of the agencies, and we as the county are in the position to help them on their behalf, but there is a lot out there, and even we don't have all that capacity that we can bring to the table. So finding those emergency grants for the local agencies in that area to be able to fulfill FEMA grant money that is due to them, it was particularly poignant for me. And I may come back around to some of the others, but I wanted to give some space to other commissioners as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Further questions from the board? Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I think I just also want to appreciate all the work. As the newest commissioner, I haven't been part of this work up to date, so I'm really looking forward, if we're able to continue this work and diving in and getting a little more involved. As Commissioner Buck mentioned, all of the issue areas are relevant and important, and the presentations were really great. There are a couple that especially stand out for me as having extra interest in digging a little deeper and learning from and supporting the work, particularly around the anti-poverty, hunger and homelessness relief work and the equity work. As a former member of the Equity and Access Advisory Board, really the encouragement to expand our capacity for that work beyond what we've budgeted for in the coming fiscal year and beyond that one advisory board. Thank you for all of that. I think the one thing that I will say is many of these really thorny social issues that we work on have a culture component in terms of what the culture of our society and our communities brings to the table to both cause or address or have an appetite to address these issues. Of course, here at the county, there's always an operational piece. How are we actually implementing programs to address these social issues? But there's also a policy component. And so I'm really curious in the work ahead with the student groups, if there's opportunity to identify not only the need for culture change and language and the way we talk about these issues, not only the need for operational changes and the kind of programs we need to implement to address them, but also recommendations for policy that can help create the container for the work and sort of codify the commitment to addressing these issues through policy.
Ambulance and their work. Department managers could work with the newly formed department.
Commissioner Trieger. Commissioner Bozic.
In the same way, so it'd be helpful to collect data on both employee and citizen perception of lens satisfaction.
Chair, we're hearing another meeting going on.
Sounds like, yeah. I will mute people.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's much better.
And Commissioner Trieger, thank you very much for the questions, the comments. You kind of opened up the tin a little bit because there was a great deal more to talk about. Commissioner Bozic.
Thank you. Always a great group of presentations. Our work with the with this group has been excellent over the years. I will note that almost every single presentation, in fact, I think every single presentation, noted adding staff. And also maybe even buying new software or whatever else. So there was a lot of call out for resource on all of these. And as we just at least finished up budget committee, we all understand how resource limited we can be at times. So I do appreciate though the presentation that included a table of grant possibilities for that staff. So I just, it's interesting, a lot of the issues we face today, it's about having the resources to address them. And we just need to keep working on getting those resources. And I'll probably talk more about that when we get back to the budget here in a week or so. So, but it definitely sounds like almost every problem we have requires resources. And we just need to think about that a little bit. But I really appreciate the work. I really appreciate the collaboration we've had with the University of Oregon, and particularly this policy lab over the last several years. Some really great stuff has come out of that. And when it gets to the next item, I will be supporting our continuing work with them.
Thanks, Commissioner Bozievich. Then I'll say a few words. First to you, Professor Cross. I cannot begin to express how strongly I appreciate the entire work of the program that you direct. I'd like to thank you personally for the things that you've done, not the least of which is providing a cadre of new employees to Lane County through their work in the policy lab. And I don't know how many, Mr. Rickoff, I don't know how many staff members we've gained through this work, but I know it's substantial. And you can see the quality of the work from the presentations that were made. Roughly grouped into three types of presentations. The first was on natural hazard and emergency management. The second one was surrounding human services. And the third was surrounding equity and access. I'm going to talk ever so briefly about the two in the middle, the human services part, because I've been working quite some time on both of those. On HMIS, we're very proud of our work on HMIS. We're ahead of so many other counties and so many other jurisdictions regarding a homeless management information system. We do a really good job. But what you all pointed out today was some really glaring, not necessarily flaws, but areas that we can work on. The first that really struck home to me was that the city jurisdictions are having trouble accessing HMIS data because they have to clear it through the county. And that really raises a flag for me, because we do try to make it easier, but clearly it's not something that is fully reaching the level of the city. Nothing to say much about that right now, other than the flag's been raised. The second was that you mentioned that HMIS doesn't provide qualitative data, only quantitative data. And that is an area that we're embarking upon right now, but this once again raises the flag that to gather a body of qualitative data that based upon individual experience in the homeless management information system and the reasons and causes of their involvement, and marry it or overlay it with the quantitative data that we do gather, which brings up the third point that you mentioned, that our agencies have difficulty using the software system that we have to enter their data. If we don't have complete data, we don't have a complete system. And I know for one that the mission, for instance, has had intense difficulty overlapping the type of data that they gather and they input into their system, overlapping it with ours. Once again, you've raised the flag. Superb work on HMIS. Then I'll mention the work on Food for Lane County. Food for Lane County is, once again, very accomplished in its work. You've identified a few areas that I'm certain that they'll be anxious to hear, areas that they can be even more effective. You talk about using GIS data to identify the hotspots of specific needs for people who are in need of food assistance. So, Professor Clark, an amazing job. I really want to once again personally thank you for bringing this group of presenters together today, and for doing that in the past and for the future. Mr. Rickoff, I'll turn it over to you if you have any questions or comments.
Chair Farr, thank you very much. Professor Clark, do you have any comments? First, before we jump in there, this has made, from my perspective, all the more impressive that this research was done during days of COVID. A lot of these projects were 10 weeks long. So the ability for these students to get in and get a quick dive into subject matter is really quite impressive. It's going to give us a lot of things to work on and think about here in the future. To Commissioner Bozievich's point that there was numerous thoughts about increased resources, increased staffing. It's nice to have that agent of reality, recognizing that we are asking many staff in various units to perform minor miracles with what they have. It is our reality. And of course, with all of these recommendations, you're hearing about them in real time. Our directors and managers are hearing about them as well. So there'll be thought given to these recommendations. And it's certainly too soon to say what we will be able to act on. Grateful that several of these projects will continue on next year, and that we'll be able to build on this research. Again, exciting times. It really is an inventive and creative program, and I'm glad the county is a part of it. Professor Clark.
Thank you to the board and Greg as well. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to engage our students in the School of Planning, Public Policy, and Management, and others, in fact, across the university, in being able to have real-world problems put at their fingertips and being given the agency to contribute to solving these problems while they're in training. That's really an invaluable resource for our students, taking something from theoretical in the textbooks and working with your staff and others across the community to really prepare them for the next stages in their career. We really value the leadership from the top on down of Lane County and being so creative and inventive and engaging in this endeavor with us.
And thanks again, Professor Clark. You know, the presentations we received today are market level presentations. You talk about your students being in training. Their training is at a very high level. The presentations that we're seeing today could easily be adapted to be a high cost presentation to jurisdictions that would have actually commissioned them. And you're providing them, your students are providing them to us, not free of charge by any stretch of the imagination, because they put a great deal of time and effort into it. But my congratulations to them for what really is not just a step into a career, but actually a blend into a career. Excellent presentations. And I in particular, the one on HMIS, I took all the notes I could possibly take, and I'm hoping that I can get the PowerPoint presentation that that the students provided, Professor Clark, so that we can really dig down and maybe get some more questions when we have a little bit more time to talk. And as Commissioner Buck mentioned, we have had an opportunity in the past in Harris Hall to interact directly with the Policy Lab. Looking forward to that, Mr. Kincaid. I see you nodding. You're the one that facilitates much of this work. So anything further from the board before we conclude this item and move along to the intergovernmental agreement? Professor Clark, I see nothing further on that. Then we'll move along to item 8B, which is Order 21060809. In the matter of approving an intergovernmental agreement with the University of Oregon for the continuation of the Policy Lab and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the intergovernmental agreement. Mr. Rickoff.
Chair Farr, thank you very much. And with this, I have invited Jeff Kincaid to join us. He really is the boots in the ground and has done a remarkable job of helping to manage this program. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to him.
Thank you, Greg. I'm going to be pretty brief in our comments. We've taken a lot of your time today, but just like the presentations you just saw were the tip of the iceberg really to this work, so is this intergovernmental agreement. This is the formal relationship that we have with the university that really leads to a lot of informal work outside of its boundaries. We've been working with the Policy Lab since 2018. And we're seeking now to get the board to approve a 3-year extension of our contract with the university. As we've hit it all a lot, Greg and Ben and the students have really hit on the benefits that it provides. So these students are able to have real world problems and then engage with the people that are working to solve those, and staff is able to receive the benefit of seeing a completely different viewpoint on things, as well as additional capacity through the research that you're seeing. Also, how invaluable is it that we're able to get these students in front of you, the board? I mean, I remember my first presentation to a public body, it was like a couple of years ago. And that experience of doing this is really valuable for these students as they go through, and it's valuable for our community as we develop these future leaders. Really, we're looking to extend this because we're seeing the benefit, and we're hoping the board sees it as well. As we continue to emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, we're going to have more of those presentations and more opportunities for the board to engage directly. But there's still a lot of engagement happening behind the scenes with directors and managers and students around the organization, and we're all really appreciative of their work. So the intergovernmental agreement before you is to extend for 3 years starting July 1 of 2021, so in just a couple of weeks. Our investment in this is $60,000 annually. As Professor Clark has mentioned, that's tripled or more that investment we see as benefit. And we're tackling grants, and the university also chips in quite a bit. Professor Clark, his time is very valuable, and he really does a great job advancing the work of this and the partnership as well. So we're seeing lots of tangible and intangible benefits from this, and we'd really like to continue. So the intergovernmental agreement is attached to the packet. It's pretty simple, but a lot of powerful work gets pushed out through this process. So I'm available for any questions, and as well as Professor Clark and Mr. Rickoff, but I'd hand it back to you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Captain Kincaid. And I will say that you've heard from each of the board members present the support for the program. And before Chair Berney left, he expressed support for the program also. You look at the 6 presentations we received today, each one of them stands alone as worth more probably than the $60,000 that we spend annually in terms of the input that we receive. So with that, I'll turn it over to questions from the board regarding the item before us. Ms. Rickoff, did you have your hand raised?
Yes, Vice Chair Farr, Commissioner Trieger, I've been sitting here thinking about your comments earlier. And if I may, one of the things that I think we've been remiss at doing, we've been, I think, very good at presenting the board with the results of the work of a term or the year. And to Commissioner Buck's point earlier, the engagement in the Resiliency Collaborative was ongoing, early engagement, involvement. I'd like to work with the county administrator to make sure that that the board receives early on an understanding of what the projects are for any coming term. And if there's a desire for greater involvement, a desire to understand or be engaged, that would be a good way for us to ensure you have connectivity to these projects. We've not done it up to this point, but I think it would be a solid addition as we move forward with this relationship.
Thank you, Mr. Rickoff. Any further comments from the board? Then I will entertain a motion. Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I will make a comment, and then I would be pleased to make the motion. I appreciate Mr. Rickoff's follow-up and would love to be more involved, and both on the front end and throughout the project. So thank you for that. And I'll just give as one example, since we've been talking quite a bit about Food for Lane County, the organization does an every other year hunger factors assessment survey where they survey folks coming in for food assistance to the emergency food pantries only, just one of the access points to emergency food. And that then informs the legislative agenda for the Oregon Hunger Relief Task Force in the full session years. So there's a lot of rich information about the root causes that are bringing people into food pantries. And so I'm wondering about, since there's such a focus on data collection and also closing that equity gap between the capacity of the different organizations that that Food for Lane County distributes food through, right? Some are completely volunteer run and so have really different capacity for doing that data collection. And again, speaking of capacity, I love this project because, as been mentioned, it's been identified that the county needs more capacity to do this work. And here are these students, and here is this program providing some of that capacity. So both for us at the county, but then also for the organizations that they're interfacing with and working with. So I love this project all the way around. And so I'm pleased to make the motion on Order 21-06-08-09 in the matter of approving an intergovernmental agreement with the University of Oregon for the continuation of the policy lab and delegating authority to county administrator to sign the intergovernmental agreement.
Thank you, Commissioner Trieger.
I'll second.
Moved by Commissioner Trigger, seconded by Commissioner Buck. Order 21060809. Questions? Excuse me, comments from the board or discussion? I see none. At this point, then I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Passes 4-1 with the Chair Burney excused absent on county business. That concludes this item, Professor Clark, and to your teams, thank you very much once again for the presentation. Mr. Rickoff, Mr. Kincaid, thank you for making this happen. Look forward to working together for the future, for the foreseeable future. Then we'll move along today on item 9. We have no executive session today. Item 10, other business. Mr. Rickoff or Mr. Mokrahajski, should you be here, any other business prior to recess?
No other business before the break.
Seeing none, then we'll be recessing a little bit early for lunch. We'll reconvene at 1:30 with the afternoon session, which will include a Board of Health / Board of Commissioners joint session. At this point, then, we are in recess until 1:30. Thank you.